I have a special guest right now.
You're cutting off my hey.
Do you want to say hello, Dylan?
Yeah,
You don't want to say hello now?
I do. Oh, I want to say hello.
Well, you can say hello. You say hello the whole time. Right now, I have a
can't
2-year-old
see you.
who's.
All I see is myself. I'm gonna pretend there's a child there. Hello, child.
A child.
Welcome.
Tell me about the news, Dylan. Tell me about your business pants. Do you wear business pants?
No.
You don't wear business pants?
No.
Do you want to
I'm
borrow
with
my
you,
business
Dylan.
pants?
No.
Why not?
Because they're too big.
That's true. I do have big business pants. Do you have big business pants, Damien?
No comment. I'm not much of a business pants kind of person.
So I'm going to ask my 2-year-old daughter 2 quick questions about the news. Number
Do it.
1, are you afraid of coronavirus?
Yes.
And number 2,
Good answer.
are you afraid of Boeing?
Yes.
Correct. You're
Two
correct.
good answers.
All right. Now you go play, and we're gonna go do the agenda. I did it. How are you today, Damian Rollis?
Talking to me? Should I do it in my cute 2-year-old voice? No, I'm good. Everything's good. How are you doing, Matt? Scardy?
Oh, man. So today, I wanna again say thank you to our listeners.
I stopped thanking people so much.
Well, they're important to me.
All right. You're really into the stakeholder generation, aren't you?
Well, today that's what we're doing. We're doing stakeholders. It's basically going to be like almost the entire show. So what's the agenda? Why don't you do the agenda?
So we're doing a little bit of Biz Ketchup, which means I'm gonna hit the 3 biggest headlines. We're gonna chat about them for a minute or two, but then we're not gonna linger so long today. We're gonna go right to Matt Makes. Matt's gonna talk about stakeholder value. Is that right?
I am. I'm going to talk about stakeholders again, and today we're going to do customers.
Good for you.
Thanks. Stop highlighting my screen because I can see it. We can see you highlighting stuff. It says Damien Rollis on there.
It's called fixing your errors. That's what I was doing.
Oh, you're like, how dare you? You're like
They used to call me Eagle Eyes Rollis for my seriously for my impeccable editorial skills, and yet did MSCI call on me to use those skills very often? No.
Can I just say, no one calls you Eagle Eye Rollis. No one anywhere says that. All right, let's Biz Ketchup.
All right.
I really got to do something about that harp.
Yeah, you do. But you tell me that you're always running behind, so
I am. Well, I mean, like this operation is about being lean.
Yeah, that's right.
So catch me up. What's going on? What do I need to know? Is there something I need to know today? Because I'm on a need to know basis.
Okay, it was my second story, but I really should start. I gotta start with this one because this is the drum that we beat here. The Caterpillar 3 is no more, Matt.
What?
I know, it's a Caterpillar 2 now. The former Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg resigns from Caterpillar board.
Can we call it the Caterpillar Deuce now?
No, it's still a Caterpillar 3 because they're the ones who created messes. They're not going to lose that. That's always going to be what it is.
Did he parachute out of that board with a couple million worth of shares, or do we know?
I don't think, I was a director. I don't know if he had that many shares. They didn't say much. Of course, public corporations always get quiet when something interesting happens. The press release was like 2 sentences. Basically, he left, and it wasn't because of any problem.
Can I ask you? Well, yeah. Is he going to spend? Is it like an athlete when they're going to spend more time with their family? Is that like?
Yes, he's going to spend more time with the children of Charles Barkley.
Seems awkward for Charles Barkley.
If he has children, I don't even know. Okay, that's the big story. Also, I'll stay with Boeing. They secured more than $12 billion in financing from more than a dozen banks amid this year-long grounding of the 737 MAX. It sounds like a big number, man.
Well, here's the advantage. When you are effectively a duopoly and you are so economically entwined as to be too big to fail in the United States, you can get funding when you need it because no one's got any place else to go. So good job, Boeing, for
Corporate socialism, hard at work.
Yeah, I mean, it is a form of corporate socialism, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, like they still are so. I mean, they're on ratings watch from the credit rating agencies, but they're still so important that of course a bank is going to fund them because do you think the banks kind of like implicitly know Boeing cannot fail? They can't.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Or explicitly.
I mean, yes. The answer is yes, Matt. Okay, health experts call for calm as coronavirus cases continue to rise. So tell your daughter to calm the F down.
Yeah, I kind of have to say that on a nightly basis.
Just to put it in the context, last year, I think, last year in the United States, there was an estimated 61,000 deaths caused by influenza. All right, the common flu. So put it in perspective, people. All right.
But they do think there isn't enough data yet to suggest whether or not this is more like SARS than the flu, which has a higher mortality rate.
But my point is that people die from things.
Oh,
right?
That's so dark
Is that a
of
good
you.
point? One company that will be keeping a very close eye on developments in China is Apple, with its supply chain concentrated in the country. So there you go, Apple.
I mean, like the travel bans are, or restrictions, and it's actually kind of a big deal if you're a company with a deep supply chain in China.
Yeah.
Maybe you should have been more racist and not gone to China.
And just because I love having things to complain about, I booked a ticket to the Chinese province where the coronavirus is, and then I canceled it just so I could complain to my friends that my vacation to the industrial part of China, to the Toledo of China was canceled, and it sucks. Woe is me. So.
Do you think you can get coronavirus from TikTok?
Seeing the videos that my daughter shows me daily, I would say absolutely yes.
Yes, it's 100% chance.
I always feel like reaching for the hand sanitizer after those videos.
Well, is it worse? I feel like drinking the hand sanitizer when I see something on Facebook. Is that worse?
Well, that suggests a deeper problem. The last story what is this? The ketchup? The ketchup.
Yeah, we're in ketchup.
We're in ketchup mode. Nike seeks to stop profiteering after Kobe Bryant's death. The sports gear giant, as if you had to describe Nike, is said to have pulled all items tied to Kobe Bryant from its website to stop flippers from selling merchandise featuring the late NBA star. Nike's also still figuring out a new strategy for releasing Kobe's new shoe line, which is about to come out. So what would you do if you were Nike?
I'd ask Colin Kaepernick what he thinks.
Raise the prices, obviously.
Well, I would ask Colin Kaepernick what he thinks first. I like the Kobe thing seems to be resonating in a very, I don't know if it's just my, particular Twitter or Facebook bubble, but it has seemed to resonate fairly deeply in a way that I haven't, like impeachment doesn't resonate, and that affects every person in the country.
Well, look, if you're basically hanging out with middle-aged white guys, then they love basketball, and so they're talking about Kobe. But yeah, it goes beyond that.
It does seem to go beyond.
Even my daughter, who anything I try to tell her about things I like or things that were cool when I was younger, she really like goes for the nearest toilet to put her head into it. She's so disgusted with me. But even this one, she's super into. She's like, her basketball team was talking about it. She was showing me, again, TikTok videos. She's like, Dad, you got to look at TikTok. Every video is about Kobe Bryant. And she started swiping through them. And it's true. Every video is about Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, so my wife is in India right now with a bunch of other surgeons. And I talked to her last night. And she was like, yeah, all the doctors here in India are talking about Kobe Bryant.
What? Come on.
I think so. This is something that sports, we talked about this when we were forming this company. Sports is a shared experience. It's like you feel like you know these people.
So is death.
And death is too. It's like our ultimate fear, and especially like an untimely one. That's like the worst. And the untimely one of his daughter, like the idea of
that's true.
Him and his daughter doing this, it hit you
Yeah.
uniquely individually, or maybe not
Yeah.
uniquely, but individually, I think if investors and corporations had shared experiences, maybe we'd be more outraged by stuff like Boeing's board.
That's a great point. Well, we've talked about many times that that Boeing plane went down in the U.S. It'd be a whole different discussion about the Boeing board.
So maybe I can segue this into
All
Matt
right.
Makes
Yeah.
by
We're
making it
done.
more
Put the
individual.
ketchup away. Put
Let's
the
do it.
ketchup in the fridge. Don't make a mistake and put it in the cupboard. That's gross.
That's disgusting, and it's moldy ketchup.
So, what are we talking about today, Matt?
So I want to continue, and this will be an extended version.
Get ready.
The conversation we've been having about stakeholders. We talk a lot about stakeholders here, and I'm sure
Not
that,
enough.
I mean, arguably, maybe not enough, but I want to kind of continue it because so far we've talked about the employee as stakeholder, but the reason why we're talking about this is in part because of the Business Roundtable, and I'm not going to belabor this. The Business Roundtable is a bunch of massive companies. They have decided that stakeholders are their prime directive instead of shareholders. Good on them for having that discussion. They've defined a set of stakeholders themselves. It's based off a lot of academic research, but then it looks like, this investor value chain is doubling down on the idea of stakeholders. Davos was all about stakeholders. BlackRock, CEO Larry Fink is talking about stakeholders. So asset managers are talking about stakeholders. And let's be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about who stakeholders are. Stakeholders are all of the things, all of the people or involved in a company could not exist without this whole value chain. So really what we're talking about is customers, employees, investors, governments, and then arguably there's some there's some amorphous stakeholder called what I'm calling the system, which is basically sort of like this communal set of resources, whether it's, you suck water out of a well, or you dig something out of a mine, or it's the things that we, the air we breathe. It's all these things that we sort of require to exist. Okay.
Right. Yep.
So we've talked about this before here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But I do think the thing that I haven't talked a lot about, and you and I talked about in pre-production, was this idea of investing in stakeholders, right?
Right. Yes. This is what interests me. Yeah.
So I'm going to, as I go through sort of this narrative about what it means to, return, like how a company returns value to its customers, like the value a customer gets out of a company's existence. I want to reframe it from the standpoint of we're all investors. So as we go through this, the important thing to sort of remember is you're an investor, you've got dollars. You're not just a customer. You're not just, you can actually invest in a company, and by investing in that company, you're investing in those companies' stakeholders. Okay.
Right. Yes.
So this is actually sort of what the Business Roundtable has been talking about, redefining the narrative of investing around stakeholders. It's not just about a shareholder, it's about a stakeholder. So the question that we're going to solve for is, at least we're going to try to, is for every dollar you invest, you've invested in a company. You, Damian Rollis, I'm looking right at you, and I want you to think of it. For every dollar you've invested, what do stakeholders get? Okay?
Right. And this appeals to me because I was talking about before, I wouldn't call myself a big investor. Like from the shareholder point of view, I don't really care. I mean, I don't really care about the return that goes to ownership. I don't really care the return that goes to management and CEOs. But this stuff I do actually care a great deal about. Like if I thought that I was investing $1 in a company and it was like uniquely helping the labor force, for instance, it's something I'd really be into. So yeah, keep going.
I like to think of it as nutritional information for companies, right? Mm-hmm. Like what's the if you were to, and you framed it this way, if you were to label every investment in a company around its stakeholders, would you change the way you do it? So we've already talked about employees. I won't go backwards and talk about them again. So I will remind anybody who is listening, please be listening, that we used an example of Walmart, and an employee basically gives their time and gets paid for it. And we said that for an employee, Walmart effectively extracts the equivalent of 5,600 lifetimes from its employees every single year. Like, that's because they have 2.2 million employees. The time they put in, the equivalent is about, it's like 5,600 lives spent at a Walmart per year. And they pay their employees. There's a minimum wage, and we want to say, well, the value that an employee gets is anything they get above a bare minimum wage. So in Walmart's case, it came to something like $1,000 per employee above minimum wage, right?
Yeah.
And we can compare that to other companies on the Business Roundtable, because we want to say, Business Roundtable board, like, do they really care about stakeholders? Like, how do we measure that, right?
Yeah.
We can show that Walmart's on the Business Roundtable board paying $1,000 extra per employee for the lives they effectively take. And a company like Cummins Incorporated, who pays roughly the same amount in absolute value to its employees, actually is giving $30,000 to each employee above minimum wage, right? Like,
yeah,
so
you told me today that if I invested $1 in Walmart, that 1 penny of that dollar essentially goes to the employees.
That's correct. So
1 penny.
1 penny for every dollar that you invest in Walmart. So I'm going to make I'll come back to this at the end, because I added a slide that includes the employees at the end. But for the customer, okay?
Yeah.
You're a customer, right?
Yeah.
What do you do as a customer with a company?
Well, I gotta say, now that I'm working at this company, I'm a customer. I'm not as often a customer. No, I'm serious.
Well, that's a function.
Yeah, maybe it's a good thing.
That's a function of company cash flow.
Yeah.
As an employee. So as a customer, right? What you give a company is just your money.
Yeah.
All right. So the easy way to think about this, and what you get out of it, is some sort of value for what you paid. But I'll use a real life example, and I'll use GM, right? Because GM makes something like tangible that we can all understand. GM basically makes cars. They have employees. They put together, and robots, probably, right?
Yeah.
A lot of robots put together the cars. GM manages that whole process. You, as the customer, pay GM some amount of money to buy the car. That's it. The value you get is the car, right? Like your ability to use it. But really, what you're giving GM is just revenue, right? Like the input as a customer, and this is a dumb, simplistic idea, but the input as a customer is revenue. Like, it's something we can measure, right? Walmart last year brought in $500 billion of revenue.
Okay.
So can I sidebar? Because that sounds like an absurd amount of money to me.
Yeah, it does. Is this chart right? $500 billion.
$500 billion. That is correct.
Right.
Well,
But there are a lot
actually,
of Walmart. There are a lot of Walmarts. And you know what, Matt? I'm going to be honest with you. They're really big. Like, there's a lot of stuff for sale in there.
There's a lot to buy. I feel like a lot of it's useless crap.
A lot. Well, that's not what we're talking about, though. But yeah.
So revenue as an input is one way to think of, like, okay, that's how much a customer values what that company does, right? Like, Apple. If you buy an Apple product, like you buy an iPhone, it's worth the $1,000 you just paid for the fucking $1,000. It's absurd.
Yeah. That's if you buy a new one. Yeah.
But it's worth the $1,000 to you to buy it.
Sure.
Especially because you shelled out $1,000. It's got to be worth something. So, but I want to play a little game here, because the idea that we're talking about is actually value add. There's a product marketing concept that the way they measure customers, they measure on effectively on a 2-axis chart. They say, how much is a customer willing to pay relative to the quality of the product that they get?
Okay.
So if you, so we're going to play a version of, like, who would you do, right?
Yeah. Sure.
and we'll use GM and Toyota.
Which is oddly what I always use when I play Who Would You Do? GM and Toyota.
It's never Margaret Thatcher
Always, no, it
versus
always
the Queen
starts
of
with
England.
GM and always starts with GM and Toyota.
So the who would you do here, and this is a calculation that we as customers always make, is would I rather buy like a local GM, a US made GM car for $10,000 that will last me 5 years, or a foreign made Toyota that will last me 15, and how much am I willing to pay for that? Right? Like it's this quality versus price sort of conundrum. And the other way to think of it is Apple versus Android, right? I just use Apple as an example. You buy an iPhone for $1,000, but you can buy an Android for like $200.
Sure.
Is it the gap there, the premium you're willing to pay on Apple, is it really worth it to you?
Right. Well, right. And as you're talking about, I mean, I want to know a lot more though, you know? I want to know about all these things, about all the variables, not just the price.
Well,
I mean, I want to know how GM treats its workers or blah, 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 blah.
So and that's part of the problem when you're talking about customer value add, right?
Right.
The publicly available quality is actually a hard thing to measure, especially across different industries. Like we know iPhone effectively bricks their phones after 3 or 4 years. I think how do they phrase it the last time I was in the Apple store? I was like, give me an honest takeaway. How fast, if I buy this used phone, how fast before it's totally outmoded? And he was like, honestly, it's probably like 6 months or a year away.
Oh, and that guy's fired.
Well, that guy,
how dare he?
I ended up buying a new phone because of what that guy said. That guy's a genius.
Yeah, that's really dumb of you, though.
Yeah, well, there's no accounting for being a moron.
Right.
But that's the thing. Like, you are talking about like quality is sort of this amorphous blob, especially when you're saying like, okay, so iPhones are outmoded in 3 or 4 years. GM, your warranty lasts what, 5 years maybe. And then what if you got a mortgage from JP Morgan? What's the quality of that mortgage? Quality is really hard and it's very idiosyncratic. But what you can measure, what's measurable at scale, is the premium you're willing to pay for that shit.
Yeah.
So what I did to measure, and this seems really simplistic, but what I did to measure what is customer value is I took that revenue number, right? And then I said, how much did it cost the company to get that revenue? Right?
Okay.
Like how much did they...
So for Walmart, $500 billion, how much did it cost for them to get $500 billion of revenue?
How much did it cost them to get $500 billion of revenue? Yeah. And the gap... it cost Walmart effectively to get that $500 billion. It cost them. Wait, I have the number right here, and I'm just going to look at it in real time.
40?
It effectively cost Walmart. Where are you, Walmart? It cost them $470 billion almost to get that revenue.
No.
This chart is not accurate.
It cost them $470 billion to get $500 billion of revenue.
That's right.
Oh,
that's about right? Like the cost to actually produce what these companies produce and to sell it then, right, to market it to you, the customer, is not cheap. It's a lot.
Right, I guess so, yeah.
When you think about it, it's actually a lot. So let's go back to GM, because GM, it's easier. Walmart is like, you think of Walmart and you think of like, a bunch of retail crap. But GM, you think of like a car, right? GM... the revenue GM produced in 2019 was $147 billion. They basically got paid $147 billion for their widgets. It cost them effectively $130-ish billion to make those widgets. So the way you can measure customer value in an absolute sense is customers were willing to pay $18 billion more than it cost to buy GM cars.
Okay.
Now we can do this for every one of these companies. This is effectively a version of earnings. It's not really that complicated. But I said we want to frame this from an investor standpoint, right? You're an investor, because these numbers make like it's what does that mean? What is 18 billion? Is that a lot? Is that a little? Do I care? Like what do I care? So the way to think about this as an investor is you're giving GM $1 as an investor
To invest. Yeah.
to do all this stuff, to create
Sure.
stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the number that you can take away with GM, and then I'll show it to you relative to all the other Business Roundtable members.
Okay.
For every investor dollar you give GM, the customer got 37 cents of value.
All right, that sounds okay, but yeah, I don't know what that means. What? Show me the rest. Show me the
GM was actually the largest amount of value of all of the Business Roundtable board members.
Right. Where's Walmart?
Walmart is made 10 cents of value for customers.
Okay.
So there's a big gap between GM. In fact, Walmart is sort of like middle of the pack for how much it gave customers if you're an investor. Now remember, this is not like you're the customer of Walmart. How much value did you get? This is for every dollar you gave Walmart as an investor, you got the customer as stakeholder got 10 cents of a dividend. Think of it like a dividend.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
I think so. I think so.
Now, what's interesting about this calculation is when we start to look at things through this lens, you think so. You're not like.
No, it's a bit of it's challenging. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to visualize 37 cents of value for the customer out of the dollar I gave to GM. Like I'm just trying to understand. Like, I guess I need to know what the other stakeholders are getting.
Well, that's where this goes.
I want to know how my dollar is being distributed, essentially.
So the next steps for this is to show all of the stakeholders and how that value accrues. So what I've done, if you're watching this live on YouTube or Twitch or Periscope, which you should be doing, and if you're not watching it live, you should be watching the YouTube clips afterwards. Because it's all
because you have YouTube. Everyone does.
I mean, everybody's got YouTube.
Everybody.
What you can see is when you put on top employees next to customers, you can see how value starts to get distributed. So in GM's case, we just said every dollar as an investor you gave GM, 37 cents of that is value given to customers. But from the data that we used before on employees, 22 cents goes to employees. So effectively, what this data suggests is that GM pays a larger dividend to its customers than to its employees.
Yeah, it's like of the people for the people.
But when I compare it to another company,
like Walmart,
what you find is Walmart's giving 1 penny to its employees.
That's crazy.
It's giving
that's disturbing.
10 times more value to its customers than to its own employees. So if you are an investor here, and we've established that you are.
Sort of, yeah. No, I am.
If you are an investor here and the employee matters more to you than the customer.
It does.
Then Walmart is effectively off the table for the Business Roundtable.
Off the table.
So get out of my table.
Walmart? How dare you?
Get out of my table, okay?
And do you remember offhand what the CEO pay ratio is? The CEO salary to the median salary there? It's high. It's very high.
For Walmart, and this is just an inflammatory number, but
it's based on reality.
The CEO makes, and this is based on their own disclosure, right? So we didn't make up this ratio.
No.
The Walmart disclosed that its CEO makes more than 1,000 times the median employee.
Yeah. Jesus.
Compare that to GM, who we've railed on Mary Barra a lot here for not coming to the table and talking to the employees. We remember when she didn't talk to the employees during the strike?
That's right.
We talked about them a lot in like October, November.
Mm-hmm.
She disclosed 345 times more than the median.
Still seems obscenely high, yeah.
Well, every CEO is up way above 100. The only one who's closer was one of my favorites, Lynn Good, sitting on the board of Boeing and Caterpillar.
Yeah.
Oh no, wait, she doesn't sit on Caterpillar, but she is on the board of Boeing.
Yeah.
Our one of the Boeing board members who we've been railing against, she only makes 119 times more than the median
Only.
employee.
Yeah.
Only
Where's that? Where's that? Duke Energy.
Duke Energy. So this
Now,
is,
okay. Now,
but-
I know you're wrapping this up.
but I want to point this out, right? This is where the stakeholder value goes, right? Like this is what we're trying to establish here. Is you are an investor in the companies. We've established a lot about how you're the board's boss and management is effectively, the board is management's boss. We're saying like we're talking a lot about stakeholder value and how do you revalue a company around stakeholders as an investor. This is the incremental way you can measure this value. We're going to go over the next 3 stakeholders over in coming episodes. But right now we're starting to establish, okay, you're an investor in Walmart. Guess what? 1 penny of every investor dollar goes to the employees. 10 cents goes to the customers. Where does the rest go? And by the end, we should see which companies are on the Business Roundtable board are returning the most value to stakeholders.
Do me a favor, if you can, maybe at some point this week. Could I see like Target versus Walmart, or maybe like Toyota versus GM? Could you just like
Are you giving
pull
me
out a couple?
homework?
Yes. I want to steer people to how they're going to run their lives now. I want to tell them where they're going to shop. I do.
I will do that someday.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Matt. That was good.
That is Damian Ross. I'm Matt Muscardi.
Stakeholder value. You hear that, Business Roundtable?
This is
what
Business
you created.
Pants, in which we are defining stakeholder value. If you like what you heard, subscribe, rate us, do all those things. We're on every podcast platform. We're on all the video platforms. We're everywhere. I want to thank our team here, which includes the 2 Courtneys, who are our executive producers and advisor. Our advisor, Dan Rogachnig, who helped us set up this thing. Dan, if you're out there, you are.
Yeah, where are you, Dan?
Dan, we love you. We also want to thank John Walsh, who's our art and designer. We want to thank Todd Hovanek and the Asset Clowns, who produce the music for this show. Give us 5 stars, please, pretty please, and come back at us tomorrow. When tomorrow we have ESG Wednesday.
Oh, geez.
Coming at you.
Yeah. A lot of inside talk. All
Damien,
right.
I'll
See
talk to you
man.
tomorrow.